what got you here is not what's going to keep you here. And what keeps you here is not what's going to get you to the next step. Our students need to understand that they have to constantly grow and evolve while learning.
Hello, Wolfpack fans. Join me in welcoming someone who truly represents the heart of the Wolfpack, Dr. Kanton Reynolds. Hi, Kanton.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad you're here. A little bit about you. I know you're known for your passion for innovation, teaching, and helping students discover their potential. And as director of undergraduate programs in industrial engineering, you are constantly creating opportunities for students to learn, grow, and lead. Whether you're mentoring future engineers, building creative programs, or sparking big ideas in the classroom, you bring energy, insight, and genuine care for everything you do. And we're so happy that today we get to dive into your insights and your nuggets of wisdom for our listener.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're going to get right into this first question, which is Director of Undergraduate Programs in Industrial Engineering. Big job. I'm sure you've seen students struggle, you've seen them succeed and transform. What do you think really makes the biggest difference in how a student grows while they're on their college journey?
So, the first thing I would say is that what got you here is not what's going to keep you here. And what keeps you here is not what's going to get you to the next step. Our students need to understand that they have to constantly grow and evolve while learning. So, when you talk about learning, the first thing I would say is our students need to learn how to study. To this point, a lot of them have relied just on the fact that they're smart, right? This is a pretty competitive institution. And if you got into NC State, you probably belong here, but you need to change your study habits and understand that instead of relying just on intelligence, you need to understand how to adjust and know what success looks like. And part of that is working through the process instead of microwaving it. We all want to cut to the end, right? But you should begin with the end in mind, right? So what are the building blocks that I need in order to get to where I want to go? How do I scaffold those steps so that I'm learning incrementally and building toward that larger goal? And so when students come to me and say, hey, I'm struggling with this or I need help with that, the first question is, how are you approaching the problem? Right? Because everyone's thought process is a little bit different. And so when you think about solving problems, you need to understand what they've done from a structural standpoint to get there. And then how can we wrap some services around them, whether it's tutoring or supplemental instruction, or maybe simply studying with other people. That's one of the common things I hear from students is I study better by myself. Well, if you read the research, it tells you that even if you're paying 100% attention to me in class and you're not on your phone or doing some other things, you're only picking up about 60% of what I'm saying. So you need to take your 60% and put it with somebody else's 60%, and maybe that puts you a little bit closer to the end goal.
That's interesting. 60%. Yeah, everybody's mind is getting diverted and distracted.
And digesting the information, right? Like I'm presenting new concepts to you and you're trying to understand how does this fit into the grand scheme of what I'm supposed to learn in this class or what I'm supposed to take away from this major, right? And while you're doing that processing, what's happened? I've already moved to the next thing, right? So you got to take your 60% and put it with someone else's. And that's why teamwork makes the dream work.
Ooh, good, good, good. So let's talk about perfectionism. A lot of people feel the pressure to be perfect, and that could be the listener who's a graduate student in their PhD program. And like you said, it's a very competitive university. What is a moment on your journey? Let's get a little personal when you stumbled. And what did you learn that might encourage someone who possibly is in that struggle bus right now?
I think the most important thing is we have to give ourselves grace. And I think those of us that kind of live through COVID as faculty members learn to give ourselves a little bit more grace in an environment where we were teaching in a classroom with students and you interact with them, you can read the body language and I can see if you're on your phone, to a digital world where we had to be a little bit more creative in how we conveyed information to students. So I would say the first thing is give yourself a little bit of grace. The second thing I would say is prioritize. And what I mean is when I first started teaching, I felt like I had to get if I had 10 things set out for a lecture, I had to get all 10 of these things, across to the students. And if I didn't do that in my 75 minutes, then I failed, right? And I walked away feeling like I wasn't successful in that day. And that's not the case, right? Sometimes you have students that, are different levels than other students, and they start bringing interesting questions that you hadn't even thought of into the discussion. And it's more important to edify those questions and with answers and strategies than it is maybe to meet the points that you needed to meet. Now, always we have some things that we have to cover in a class that are part of the student learning outcomes. But when you start talking about those other additional things, then giving yourself some flexibility around that is important. So if a lecture doesn't go the way I envision it, especially in a graduate course, then I try to lean into that change, right? And I try to set the pace in a manner that's not uncomfortable for my students. And then also figure out, okay, what can I learn from this that will help me make this a better lecture the next time that I teach this course? And then the last thing is, I'm your instructor. I'm your faculty member. That doesn't mean I have all the answers, right? This is a university. It's a place of learning, a place of knowledge and growth. All the answers don't have to come from the front of the classroom. Sometimes the answers come from people that are in the class, especially when you have a graduate course or you may have non-traditional students. And then sometimes the answers come from the interaction across those boundaries, those artificial boundaries that we impose on each other by only working or studying with certain groups of people, whether that's the people that I went to high school with or the people that are from, my particular dorm, whatever it may be. Working across those barriers and building knowledge together is what makes any university, especially this university, great.
And I really relate to the giving yourself grace. That is a wonderful thing. And we were talking before the show about how in our Gallup strengths, we both have empathy. So that's at the top of mind for us is giving ourselves a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and other people that cross our path rather than thinking the worst about them. And as we're talking a lot about your role here, I like to transition a little bit into what built the foundation before you got here. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you've worked in a lot of fast moving environments where there's innovation and there's leadership. What lessons from industry, because we're in this kind of ivory tower over here, it's very different than the world outside. So, being in industry, what did you carry as a lesson from that side of the house that helps you approach your interactions with students and faculty here on campus?
The first thing I would say is you have to constantly reinvent yourself, right? So, 20 years ago, it was, project management, PMP, and certifications, or, 30 years ago was Lean Six Sigma, or 10 years ago was MBA, right? All of those things, we've moved away from them. And now it's, AI, it's data analytics, it's machine learning, right? So you have to constantly reinvent yourself, both as a scholar and a faculty member and as a student, right? And I think we've seen some examples of that, here in the College of Engineering at NC State. And the other thing I would tell you is, and I tell my students this all the time, your network is your net worth, right? Sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. And there is a theory, I think it's called the theory of weak ties, right? And so it says that it's not the person that you're besties with that is going to be the most helpful for you. It's that person that your bestie knows that you may not have even met before, right? It's the power of the relationships that can, change things for you. I'll give you a good example. A few weeks ago, MetLife, one of our local companies here, had an event on campus talking about artificial intelligence. And prior to coming to NC State, I, had a career in industry. So I'm a 1995 NC State graduate. I went to work at General Motors. I went to graduate school, went to work at IBM and then Lenovo, and then started my career in academia. But I'm still, pretty connected with a lot of people that I worked with in industry. And at this particular MetLife event, someone that I used to work with really closely was on the panel. And so a bunch of folks, reached out to me and said, hey, we're going to be on campus to support, this person on this panel. You should come. Of course, I'll be there. And so having the opportunity to sit in a workshop discussion on our campus with business leaders, one of whom who I used to work with, 20 plus years ago, and then have, former colleagues around me, 7 of them, in fact, from Lenovo, was just, breathtaking because I've seen how far they have come in their professional careers, why I've transitioned to a different career, but also those relationships are still there. And this was an event where there were both faculty, staff, and students. So when the event is over with, of course, there's students of mine that are there that are coming up to me and I'm making introductions for them. Hey, you had a, internship last summer in supply chain. Here's the director of supply chain at Lenovo, right? You had an internship last summer working in manufacturing. This person works in manufacturing at this company, right? And so being able to make those connections directly, right, says a couple of things. it conveys to the students that, hey, this is someone who's not just teaching me in the classroom, but also is understanding, knowledgeable of the things that are relevant outside the classroom, right? Because we know we can't provide everything for our students here. The other thing that it provides to the student is that I have made a personal introduction to you, to someone in my network that works at a company that you may want to work at. That's essentially endorsing you, right? When we talk about mentorship and sponsorship, I'm endorsing you to these folks that I've known for 20 plus years. And it says that I'm still doing my best to connect the best and brightest at NC State to the opportunities that are available outside of the institution. And that's really what gives me joy as a faculty member.
I 100% would like to jump on what you just said and agree with it because one of the most meaningful experiences I ever had was I got to spend a 6 month sabbatical in Brisbane, Australia. How did I get that? Did I just go online and find some AI tool to match me? No. I actually got introduced to someone and I love doing that too, just connecting people. And if you didn't show up to that panel, that would have never happened for that student if they decided, oh, I don't have time for that. And you talked about prioritizing earlier. So this is one of the things to prioritize is relationship building.
Mhm. Yes, you have to put the time and effort into building, but maintaining those relationships. And I tell students, and so they're like, oh, well, it can be over. Yes, it can be overwhelming, right? Especially when you have a lot of people you're trying to keep up with. But think about it. You have tools that we didn't have access to, right? Like there was no LinkedIn when you and I were in college, right? And so you have this tool that tells you, oh, Marcy got a new job. And here's Marcy's new job description, right? And so you don't have to necessarily keep up with the day to day, but always reach out or make it a point to reconnect with people on a regular basis so that when you ask for something or you need something, people are quick to respond, right? So those are some of the life skills I try to teach my students in addition to the technical skills that we provide them in the classroom.
I'm glad you added maintaining, not just starting the relationship, because that does take effort. And like you said, you can just press a little heart on social media, but that's also different than, oh, they had a baby join their family. I'm
Mhm.
making them a quiche,
Mhm.
right? So there's still a human touch, even though we've got the tech. What's your thought on that?
Yeah. So because our relationships are global now, right? And a good example would be, at one point in time, I spent a lot of time working with folks in Taiwan when I was at IBM, right? No, I'm not going to go to Taiwan and visit them once a year. That's probably not going to happen. But I can send them a message and say, Sam Wu, who's one of my close friends when I was working at Lenovo and IBM in the technology side, Sam, how are your daughters? What are they up to these days? Right? It takes me 30 seconds to do that, but Sam knows that I'm engaging with him on a personal level, as you put it, and I care about him and his family in a way that conveys that sentiment in a manner that allows me to reach out to him when I do need something, or I have someone going to Taiwan that I want him to show around, or tell some more about the technology growth and development in that part of the world.
I agree with you. It's not just about let's get right into business and get to our agenda. It's got to be a little bit of the human side.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think that's one of the things that people miss is that, and I talk about that. So I teach engineering leadership and strategic change in our engineering management program here at NC State. And one of the modules we cover is, how do you lead people globally? And the way that we do things here in the US or specifically in Western style cultures doesn't always resonate with people in different parts of the world, right? I help co-lead a study abroad to Rwanda, right? And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sit down, we're going to have, some tea or coffee, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the world, right? Before we even get to whatever business it is we're supposed to transact, because that's what's culturally appropriate. And when you cut to the chase, as we would say here in the US, that's kind of off-putting to people in other cultures, but you only learn that through exposure and repetition and having those personal relationships so that people feel comfortable saying, hey, this is the way that you should approach this type of problem in this particular cultural, scenario.
So interesting. I know when I was in Australia, I was probably the loudest person just because I don't know, the American, just I would make eye contact with people passing. I'd say hi, and they didn't do that in that culture. They kind of looked away, and it was a little bit like the tall poppy. Have you ever heard of that?
Hmm.
Where you're out in the field, you don't want to be seen as the tall poppy.
Right.
You want to be seen as blending in that culture. What are some other things? You mentioned a few countries. Malawi's another one,
Hmm.
Guyana. You've been so many places on the planet. What are some other takeaways that you share in your leadership class about global interactions?
Yeah, Malawi's a really interesting one. I had an experience in Malawi So I spent 2 summers in Malawi. One summer I was an intern at the U.S. Embassy in Malawi, and one of my assignments was to go and audit some programs that the ambassador was sponsoring throughout the country. And so it was myself and two staff members from the embassy, but they're local staff members. They're not U.S. Staff. And so we're going through the country. And the first opportunity we had to kind of cross cultures was we went to go visit a village that, we had funded a project for them. And of course, the project was done and everything was fine. And to show, their gratitude, they wanted to gift us a goat. What are we going to do with this goat? We can't keep it at the embassy. And so, but you can't say no, right? Because that's impolite in that culture. So we rode around in an embassy vehicle with a goat in the back for a day or so until we found another village that needed a goat, right? So that's a really good example. Another example would be that same trip. We were auditing a different community. It was a community of women and children who've been mostly orphaned through the HIV/AIDS epidemic, because this was 10 years ago. And it was a female leader of that village. And so we got to that village kind of later in the day, and they wanted to go through the traditional customs of, meeting each other, greeting each other, having tea, and then having, food, and then conducting business. And so it was actually, the local staff members were like, no, we don't have time for this. We need to just do the audit and leave. And the female chief said something very, something that sticks in my mind to this day. She said, when you gave us money, you made us adhere to your terms and conditions on how we could use that money and follow your rules. Now you are in our village, right? And we're asking you to follow our rules. And so we sat and had dinner and ate and the coffee and the tea, and we didn't make our other appointment because that was the appropriate thing to do, right? And it was something that still resonates with me to this day.
So many examples that stand out through
Mhm.
all of your different experiences. If you were to summarize a few of the learning outcomes from your class, because I know everyone doesn't get a chance to take it, that you think are the most imperative for people to understand, what would be a couple that you would share?
I think the first thing is that before you enter into any cultural context that's different than your own, do the homework, right? There's a bunch of resources out there. A book that I've used for a long time is Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, right? So there's plenty of resources for you to do the research to understand how to approach scenarios in a different cultural context. Another example would be is don't forget about the power or the visibility that you're bringing to a particular area just based on who you are and where you're from. So I had the opportunity to be an international election observer when I was a graduate intern at the Carter Center in Atlanta. And so I was sent to Guyana in South America, and I was an election observer in a small rural village. And so we're counting ballots by hand using oil lamps in a schoolhouse where the mosquitoes are really thick because there's no windows, right? And so understanding that, you have the power from a certain standpoint of people's future in your hands, because as an international election observer, people are expecting you to make sure that their elections are free and fair, and they're coming to you and saying, I had this problem or I saw this thing, right? And it's your responsibility to report that and make sure that it's investigated to ensure that their future is solidified. And so thinking about not just who you are, but who you represent to the people that you're working, collaborating with, those would be some of the takeaways I would mention are probably the most significant from the course that I teach. Leadership isn't just about telling people what to do and how to do it. It's about galvanizing them to work together and accomplish more than they could individually.
Sounds like an incredible class, and I know that it makes a big impact on students. For our last question, Dr. Reynolds, we are going to move into our time machine questions.
Mhm.
So, Dr. Kanton Reynolds of 2035 steps out of the time machine and sits in the seat right next to you today and has something that he needs to tell you. What do you need to hear today?
I would say that some of the things that I think about as I was a undergraduate student here, 3.5 decades ago, is a rising tide lifts all boats, right? And so as I do the work to improve myself as a student, as a scholar, as a person, as a human being, right? I can share those lessons with other people, right? Knowledge doesn't cost you anything, and sharing it costs you even less, right? So Helping other people accomplish their goals will sometimes help you get to yours as well. So not being so myopic about myself and the goals that I wanted to achieve, and sharing those things with other people. I would think that would be the first thing that I would, want to share with a previous version of myself. I think some of the things I talked about earlier about making the adjustment to understanding that you can't just rely on being smart. Hard work will take you a lot of places that just pure intelligence won't, right? And that's what I tell my students, is that no one gets to determine how hard you work for something. And people honor and recognize hard work. And so when you put the time and effort into something, even if you don't reach the goal, there's a lesson to be learned from that. And sometimes you have to take that lesson, repackage it, and put it into the next thing. Just because you didn't get to where you wanted to go doesn't mean it was a failure. Success is often delayed, but if you work hard enough, it can't be denied.
Wow. Well, we're going to end it right there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it, and I was happy to be here. And I hope that this was helpful to some folks that are listening.